I remember the morning vividly, not because the sky tore open in revelation, nor because thunder announced some celestial decree, but precisely because of its stillness. It was the kind of morning that whispers rather than shouts. The air was heavy with dew and silence, the kind of silence that doesn't beg to be filled but invites you to listen deeper, inwardly, until all that remains is the echo of your own breath. I rose from my bed long before the first prayer, stirred not by obligation or habit, but by a kind of wordless yearning. It was not the yearning of the mind, for knowledge, for reason, for understanding. It was the yearning of the soul, that subtle pull beneath the ribs that defies explanation but demands attention. Without thinking, I cloaked myself and stepped out into the pre-dawn world. Kanya slept on, unaware of the quiet pilgrimage that had begun within me. The narrow alleys, familiar during the bustle of day, now seemed like passages between worlds, veiled in a quiet mist that clung to the stone like forgotten prayers. I did not know where my feet were taking me, and for once, I did not ask. I had spent so many years chasing answers, through scriptures, in debate halls, under the flickering lamplight of study. But that morning, for reasons I could not articulate, I was not looking for anything. I was simply moving, listening not with ears but with the space behind the heart. Soon I reached the edge of the city, where houses surrendered to open land. There, the earth widened, no longer held in by cobbled walls or shaped gardens, but sprawling and unbounded, like a breath long held finally exhaled. Before me stretched a meadow. I had passed it many times, but it had never spoken to me the way it did that morning. The grasses were tall, their tips glowing gold in the promise of dawn. Wildflowers nodded gently in the breeze, their petals closed in prayer. And there was a stillness to the place, not the stillness of lifelessness, but the living stillness of something utterly at peace with its own existence. I stood at the edge of that meadow for a long while, watching the world move without rushing, clouds drifting slowly across a pale sky, the branches of distant trees bowing ever so slightly, as if acknowledging something too vast to name. Then I stepped forward, not because I decided to, but because something within me leaned into the invitation. I waded into the grass as one might enter sacred ground, slowly, barefoot, reverently. The earth was cool beneath my feet, damp and soft, as though it had been waiting for this very moment. And all around me, life breathed, not in speech, but in presence. A beetle crawling along a stem, a spiderweb clinging to a wild stalk, the scent of wet soil rising like incense. After a while, I could walk no further. My body, my thoughts, even my breath had slowed to match the rhythm of that place. So I knelt. Then, with the gentleness of surrender, I lay down in the grass. I did not close my eyes, not at first. I wanted to see it all, the blades reaching up like green fingers toward the sky, the tiny dew droplets clinging like tears of joy, the way the world seemed to hum not in noise but in knowing. Then, slowly, my eyes did close, not from fatigue, but because the need to see had been replaced by the need simply to be. Lying there, my back against the ancient patience of the earth, something within me began to dissolve. Not violently, not in anguish, but quietly, like a not long tide finally releasing itself. I had spent so many years building names, Rumi the scholar, Rumi the preacher, Rumi the poet, but in that moment, none of them mattered. None of them held. The grass didn't care who I was. The sky didn't ask for my titles. The ants marching across my wrist did not pause to inquire about my lineage or reputation. In that perfect anonymity, I found the peace I had not known I was seeking. And then, slowly, the world changed, not in form, but in perception. The boundary between what was me and what was not me became less distinct. The breath that moved through the grass was the same breath that moved through me. The pulse of the earth beneath my spine echoed the rhythm of my own heartbeat. There was no separation. The soul had lain down, and in doing so, it had remembered its place, not above the world, not beside it, but within it. I tried, briefly, to give words to what I felt. My mind searched for poetry, for prayer, for some sacred verse to name the vastness that filled me. But each time a phrase formed, it fell apart, too small, too rigid, too narrow to contain what I was experiencing. Even the language I had always leaned upon felt like brittle reeds in the presence of an ocean. The soul, I realized, does not speak in words. It speaks in stillness, in awe, in surrender. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world becomes too full to talk about, not because it becomes meaningless, but because it becomes more than meaning. It becomes everything. So I did not speak. I did not think. I did not write. I simply lay there, allowing the fullness to enter me as light enters a window left open. I don't know how long I remained. Time, too, had joined language in fading away. But when I finally rose, the world had not changed, and yet everything was new. The same grass, the same sky, the same gentle curve of the hills, but I had become something else. Or rather, I had remembered who I had been all along. From that day onward, I wrote poems not to explain the world, but to kneel before it. I spoke not to teach, but to share the silence between syllables. I lived not to seek heaven above, but to lie down in the grass and let heaven find me. And even now, whenever the noise of the world grows loud, when names begin to matter too much and meaning begins to feel like a cage, I remember that morning. I return there, not always in body, but always in spirit. I lie down once more, and the world, full beyond words, holds me in its infinite quiet. I remained in that meadow long after the sun had lifted itself into full bloom across the sky, and yet time, so heavy in the world of men, had no weight there. It passed like a feather through air, unmeasured, unnoticed. Perhaps hours slipped through my fingers, perhaps mere minutes. It mattered not. The soul does not count moments the way the mind does. The soul knows only presence or absence. And there, in the quiet cradle of the earth, I was more present than I had ever been. So present, in fact, that even my own name began to loosen from my identity. I was no longer Rumi the jurist, Rumi the teacher, Rumi the scholar. I was no longer the son of Bahauddin, or the disciple of Burhanuddin, or the voice behind the sermons at the mosque. I was simply breath. I was grass. I was sky. I was what remained when all that was learned had been unlearned. A breeze swept over the meadow, subtle as a sigh, and it stirred the tall grass around me like a slow tide. The grass bent and swayed, not in chaos but in harmony, as if even they were praying, not with words or verses, but with their entire bodies, their entire being. And in their movement, I too began to pray, not as a man invoking something beyond, but as part of a great prayer that had begun long before my birth and would continue long after my death. It was the kind of prayer that needs no direction, no posture, no speech. It is the prayer of existence itself, the bowing of the trees, the sighing of the earth, the weeping of the sky, the silence between heartbeats. And there I was, part of it all, praying by simply being. A dragonfly hovered just above my chest, its wings catching the sunlight like shards of stained glass. It did not fear me, nor did it rush away. It simply hovered, watched, pulsed in place with the breeze. In that tiny creature's presence, I was reminded again of the utter intimacy of the world, the closeness of all things when the veil of the self has fallen away. That dragonfly and I were not separate. We were two verses of the same poem. And what was that poem, if not the one God has been writing since the first breath of creation? I thought of how often I had tried to define the divine, to speak of the beloved with words that could only ever point, never reveal. I had offered metaphors, parables, paradoxes, poetry. I had led men and women into the house of knowledge and shown them the staircase of devotion. But lying there, with the dragonfly as my companion and the earth beneath me as my prayer rug, I realized how little needs to be said when everything is already speaking. Every stone, every blade, every gust of wind was speaking God. Not speaking about God. Speaking God. The way flame speaks fire. The way rivers speak water. The way silence speaks truth. And I, too, began to forget how to speak, not because I lost words, but because the words could no longer hold what I was experiencing. They cracked under the weight of meaning. They grew brittle and inadequate. And I found, with great relief, that I did not miss them. What freedom there is in silence. What gentle joy in not needing to explain, describe, defend, or define. In that moment, I understood why the mystics so often fall quiet in the presence of the real. It is not that they have nothing to say, it is that they have seen something so vast, so intimate, so utterly complete, that to open the mouth would be to shatter it. And so I lay still. I lay like a child in his mother's arms, like a raindrop in the sea, like a verse in the breath of God. No more need to seek, no more need to strive. The world, this world, was not something I had to escape to find the divine. It was divine. Every inch of it. Every shadow and shimmer. Even the ache I had carried for years, the longing that had driven me through books and nights of weeping and desert walks, yes, even that was holy. That ache was not an emptiness, it was a fullness waiting to be felt. And now I was feeling it. Entirely. Without filter. Without name. The soul had lain down, and in doing so, had ceased to be a seeker. It had become the sought. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. What is there to say when the trees are already singing? When the ants know the direction of stars? When even the silence between the bird calls holds more truth than all the pages of my books? Eventually, the sun began to lower, and shadows stretched themselves long and soft across the meadow. My limbs were stiff, yet light. My body rose slowly, and as I stood, I did not feel like a man leaving a place. I felt like a man carrying it within him. The meadow had entered me. The silence had nested in my ribs. The fullness had settled into my bones. And I knew then that I could return to the city, to the people, to the teaching, not to teach about what I had found, but to become it. To live it quietly. To let my very presence become a reminder that sometimes the holiest thing you can do is lie down in the grass and let yourself vanish. And when the world becomes too much again, when noise and duty and identity rise like walls around me, I will know the way back. I will not need a map, only the memory of stillness, the feel of the earth's cool breath, the flutter of a dragonfly's wings, the prayer that needs no words, and the truth that waits, patient and vast, in every blade of unspoken grass. And still I lay there, not because my limbs were heavy or my body unwilling to rise, but because my soul had found something too rich, too deep, too sacred to interrupt. The meadow was no longer a place outside of me, it had become the innermost room of my own being. I felt as though I had returned to some original state, some elemental form of myself that had existed long before I became Rumi, long before the sermons and the scholars, long before words had taken root in my mouth. Here, I was not the man known by others, not even the man I believed myself to be. I was simply presence, raw, soft, eternal. As the sun climbed its slow arc across the sky, I noticed how the light changed the colors of everything it touched. The tips of the grass blades shimmered gold, then green, then a kind of pale silver as the wind shifted. I watched shadows bend and stretch, and I understood. Nothing in this world remains the same, not even stillness. Stillness, too, evolves. It deepens. It unfolds, like a flower opening petal by petal to the eye of the sky. I thought I had reached silence when I first laid down, but now I knew I had only been scratching at its surface. Beneath that surface was a deeper silence, and beneath that, another still, each one more tender and full than the last. I became aware of my own breath, not as a function of survival, but as a hymn. Inhale, the world enters. Exhale, I offer myself back. With each breath, I felt myself exchanging essence with the grass, the sky, the soil beneath. I was not taking from the world, nor giving to it. We were simply circulating the same mystery through different forms. What had once felt like loneliness in my chest now felt like a wide opening, a hollow place not of lack but of invitation, an empty chalice ready to be filled not with noise or ideas, but with pure being. And as I breathed, the roots beneath me continued their silent revelations. They showed me, without voice or vision, the way they connect, not just to each other, but to all things. Beneath the surface, the trees of the forest whisper to one another through mycelial threads, sharing food, sharing warning, sharing joy. Even in the dark, even in the unseen, they are never alone. And suddenly, I saw myself not as a solitary soul seeking truth, but as part of a living web. My thoughts, my sorrows, my loves, they were threads spun from the same loom as yours, as his, as hers, as the bird flying overhead and the fox slinking silently through the bramble. The separations we cling to, name, nation, status, belief, are surface illusions. Beneath, we are bound. I wept, not out of pain, not even out of joy. I wept because something so ancient inside me had been seen, held, and named, without language. The tears did not sting. They watered the grass beneath me, a silent offering returned to the earth that was teaching me how to remember. The grass did not mind my tears. In fact, it seemed to lean closer, as if drinking in the salt of my release with love. And I realized, nothing in this meadow was afraid of my vulnerability. The earth has no judgment for the weeping man. The sky does not turn away from the one who trembles. Everything here accepted me, not because I was perfect, but because I was real. And then I saw the great illusion we carry, that we must always rise, always speak, always define, always strive. That stillness is laziness, that silence is absence, that vulnerability is weakness. But here, in the arms of the meadow, I understood a deeper truth: stillness is strength. Silence is fullness. Vulnerability is the soul's doorway to communion. We are not meant to constantly rise. We are meant to lie down sometimes, deeply, completely, not to give up, but to give in to the pulse that unites us all. In that moment, the world became too full to talk about, not just full of beauty, but of sorrow too. Full of complexity, full of contradiction, full of longing and grace and brokenness and glory. Full of everything, and yet so balanced, so whole. There was no need to resolve it, no need to explain it. There was only the need to feel it, to lie down and let it pass through me like wine through a field. And so I remained, stretched out on the living chest of the earth, listening not with ears, but with the body of my soul. The grass no longer tickled, it comforted. The sky no longer looked distant, it watched over me like a parent. The sun no longer burned, it blessed. And my breath no longer belonged only to me, it was borrowed, like everything else, from the divine that moves in and through all things. Eventually, I would rise again. I would return to the city, to the teachings, to the words that waited in my ink and tongue. But I knew now that I would return different. Not with a new idea, but with a new silence inside me. A silence too full to be broken. A silence not of emptiness, but of presence. A silence that said, I have lain down in the grass. I have listened to the earth. I have remembered what I am. And that, perhaps, is what I would one day try to teach, not with doctrine, but with presence. Not by speaking louder, but by carrying this silence into the world, gently, fully, lovingly. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. And yet, how holy it is to try. I had spent countless nights wrestling with the shape of my own soul, wrestling with the countless voices inside me, voices of fear, doubt, longing, and hope. They circled endlessly like restless birds trapped within a narrow cage of my mind. Each voice clamored to be heard, to be answered, to be understood. And in those moments, I felt smaller than I wished to be, burdened by the weight of expectations, those I placed upon myself, and those placed upon me by others. I was a man caught between worlds, the world of flesh and blood, of day-to-day life with its demands and distractions, and the world of spirit, which beckoned silently but insistently toward a truth that seemed to evade capture by words or deeds. How was I to bridge these two realms? How was I to fly beyond the limitations that bound me when my wings felt so fragile, so untested? It was in this chasm of longing and uncertainty that I found myself drawn toward the garden, a sanctuary where the mundane and the sacred mingled beneath the shade of ancient trees. The garden was more than a place. It was a presence, a quiet refuge that held the memory of all who had sought solace there before me. The scent of jasmine and roses hung thick in the air, mingling with the faint hum of bees and the gentle murmur of a distant fountain. Each step I took upon the soft earth was like a prayer, a step away from the turmoil within and toward the possibility of peace. As I walked deeper into the garden, I felt my breath slow and my heart soften. The branches above arched in a cathedral of leaves, filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns that danced across the ground. In the stillness, I heard a voice, not a voice spoken aloud, but the voice of the earth itself, whispering secrets of patience and surrender. It told me that growth is not a sudden act, but a gentle unfolding, that strength is found not in resistance, but in yielding, that the wings I so desperately wished to test had always been within me, waiting only for the courage to open. There, amidst the quiet symphony of leaf and breeze, I knelt and placed my hands upon the soil. It was cool and damp, full of life unseen but deeply felt. I closed my eyes and let the sounds of the garden wash over me, the rustle of leaves, the distant song of a nightingale, the soft trickle of water. In that moment, I felt a shift, subtle but profound. The voices inside me began to quiet, one by one, until only a gentle hum remained. It was as if the garden itself was teaching me a secret older than words, that true freedom does not come from striving, but from surrendering, that to fly is not to escape the earth, but to embrace it fully, to root oneself so deeply that the wings may carry you higher than you ever dreamed. Opening my eyes, I looked up at the sky framed by branches, and I understood. My wings were not meant to carry me away from the world, but to lift me within it, to soar above, yes, but always to return, always to remain connected to the source that nourished me. And in that realization, a peace settled over me, soft and enduring, like the first light of dawn breaking gently over the horizon. Yet this peace did not come without struggle. The years before had been filled with battles not with enemies of flesh, but with the enemy within. Doubt gnawed at my spirit, fear shackled my steps. The world's noise often drowned the still, small voice of my soul. I was no stranger to wandering in deserts both outside and inside my heart, searching for an oasis that seemed just out of reach. But in the garden, lying beneath the trees and feeling the pulse of the earth beneath my fingers, I began to understand that the journey was not about escape or conquest. It was about opening, the opening of the heart, the surrender of the will, the acceptance of all that I was and was not. I saw then that crawling through life, burdened by fear and hesitation, was a choice to cling to shadows instead of stepping into light. I was born with wings, yes, but how often had I kept them folded tight, too afraid to test the air, too weary to rise? The garden whispered to me that the wings were not gifts to be hidden, but tools to be used, delicate perhaps, but strong enough to carry the soul beyond the confines of self-imposed prisons. It reminded me that the world was vast and waiting, that life was meant to be danced upon, not endured in silence. So I rose from that garden bed with a newfound resolve, not to flee the earth, but to fly within it, not to reject the world's hardships, but to transcend them with love and grace. I would walk boldly, speak truthfully, and love without reservation. And when I stumbled, as I surely would, I would remember the soft grass beneath my body and the patient earth beneath that, steady and eternal, waiting always to catch me, to cradle me, to remind me that I was made for flight, not crawling. This was the beginning of a journey that would fill my days and my nights, my verses and my prayers. A journey from fear to freedom, from hiding to soaring. For I was born with wings. Why, then, should I prefer to crawl through life? There came a moment in my life when the weight of the world settled heavily upon my shoulders, and I found myself standing at the crossroads of despair and hope. I had wandered far in search of truth, traversed the landscapes of knowledge, and tasted the bitter fruit of disappointment more times than I could count. The teachings I once embraced with fervor began to feel like cages rather than wings, and I questioned whether the path I followed was truly my own or merely the echo of others' voices. In those quiet hours, I grappled with the reality that life's most profound truths are often hidden beneath layers of illusion, and that the journey toward freedom is less about accumulation and more about release. I asked myself, why do I cling so tightly to fear when I was born with wings? Why do I choose to crawl when I am meant to soar? It was a question that tore through my soul, unraveling the very fabric of my being and exposing the raw vulnerability beneath. As I stood there, caught in the turbulent sea of doubt, I realized that crawling is not merely a physical act, but a metaphor for the resistance we harbor within ourselves, the fear of failure, the dread of the unknown, the shackles of expectation. I saw how I, like many others, had chosen the familiar pain of limitation over the uncertain bliss of freedom. The walls of my mind, once thought to be fortresses of wisdom, revealed themselves as prisons built from the bricks of habit and hesitation. Yet within that revelation lay a glimmer of hope, the recognition that these walls could be dismantled, that the wings I possessed were not lost but merely folded, waiting patiently for my courage to unfurl them. In the solitude of that realization, I turned inward and began the painstaking process of unraveling the chains I had wrapped around my own heart. Each thread represented a fear I had allowed to dictate my steps, a fear of rejection, of inadequacy, of surrendering control. I confronted them not with violence or disdain, but with gentle compassion, understanding that they were born from the very human desire to protect oneself. Slowly, I began to loosen my grip on the past, on the need for certainty, on the illusion that safety could be found in stillness. I learned that true safety comes not from clinging but from trusting in the invisible currents that carry us, trusting in the unseen hands that guide us, trusting in the boundless potential that resides within. And then, in the quiet spaces between doubt and acceptance, I felt a stirring, a subtle awakening within the depths of my soul. It was as if the wings I had long denied were beginning to unfurl, their delicate feathers brushing against the winds of possibility. With trembling heart, I embraced the uncertainty, choosing to step beyond the shadows that had kept me grounded. The air around me seemed to shift, charged with the promise of flight, and I understood that the act of soaring begins with a single leap, surrender to the unknown that holds both risk and grace. In that sacred moment, I vowed to myself that I would no longer crawl through life, bound by fear and hesitation. I would honor the wings I was born with, nurturing them through faith and courage, allowing them to carry me toward the infinite sky of my true self. I would rise not in defiance, but in harmony with the world, embracing the dance of light and shadow, joy and sorrow, certainty and mystery. For I knew then that to live fully is to fly fully, to let go of what no longer serves and to trust in the limitless sky that awaits beyond. This realization became the cornerstone of my journey, the beacon that guided my steps through the labyrinth of existence. It taught me that every soul, no matter how battered or weary, carries within it the sacred gift of wings. And though the path may be fraught with fear and doubt, the choice to rise above, to embrace the fullness of life, remains ever ours to make. Why prefer to crawl when we were born with wings? This question, once a whisper, now sings within me, a song of freedom, of hope, of endless possibility. Yet this path, like the flight of any bird, is not without its storms. There are days when the wind is harsh and the skies darken, when the weight of the world threatens to pull me back down to earth. On those days, the wings feel fragile, the heart heavy, and the spirit weary. But even then, I remember the garden, the place where I first dared to lie down and listen. I recall the gentle voice of the earth beneath me, the tender sway of the grass, and the quiet strength of roots unseen. That memory is a sanctuary, a wellspring of courage that renews my resolve to keep soaring. I have come to understand that flying is not a destination but a continual practice. It requires patience with oneself, forgiveness for the falls, and gratitude for every moment aloft. The wings are both fragile and fierce, delicate feathers that must be tended with care and strong muscles forged through perseverance. And the sky, vast and infinite, is always ready to embrace those who dare to rise. So now, when I face the choice to crawl or to fly, I remember who I was born to be. I remember the wings folded beneath the layers of doubt and fear, waiting for the breath of courage to stretch and unfold them. I remember that life is not meant to be endured on hands and knees, but to be danced upon the winds with open heart and lifted soul. And with that remembrance, I take flight again, carried by the winds of faith, hope, and love, soaring toward the endless horizon of what might be. The journey of unfolding my wings was neither swift nor easy. It was a slow, deliberate process marked by moments of doubt, fear, and trembling hope. I came to understand that to truly fly, I had to first embrace the depths of my own vulnerability, the shadows I had long avoided. In the quiet chambers of my heart, I confronted the fears that had bound me, the fear of failing, of falling, of being exposed and broken. These fears had wrapped themselves tightly around my soul, whispering that it was safer to crawl, to stay grounded, to cling to the familiar dust beneath my feet. But I saw now that this safety was a mirage, a prison disguised as comfort. The true freedom I sought lay beyond these walls, waiting for me to release my grasp and trust in the unseen currents of life. I remember one evening, sitting alone beneath the vast expanse of stars, feeling the cool earth beneath me and the endless sky above, and realizing that the very cosmos held no fear of the fall. The stars themselves had journeyed through darkness and silence before bursting into radiant light. How then could I shrink from the unknown? How could I deny the wings I was born with, merely because the path was uncertain? In that moment, I felt the stirrings of courage ripple through my being, like the first gentle breeze that heralds the coming dawn. It was a quiet but profound awakening, a realization that to fly meant to surrender control, to embrace uncertainty, and to trust that the soul's wings were stronger than the fears that bound them. Yet trust does not come all at once. It grows like a fragile seed, needing patience and care. I practice this trust each day, learning to breathe through my doubts, to honor my weaknesses as part of my strength, and to find solace in the rhythm of life's unfolding. When the weight of the world pressed heavily upon me, I would remind myself that even the mightiest eagle must sometimes fold its wings and rest upon the branch before taking flight again. This balance between movement and stillness became my teacher, revealing that flying is not a constant soaring but a dance, a delicate interplay of courage and surrender, effort and grace. In this dance, I discovered that the wings I was born with were not merely for escaping the earth, but for embracing it fully. They were not tools of flight alone, but instruments of connection, allowing me to move with compassion through the world, to lift others as I rose, and to see beyond the surface of things into the depths where true beauty and truth reside. I realized that crawling, though it may seem humble and safe, limits the soul's reach and dims the light it was meant to shine. To crawl is to live within the shadows of one's own potential, to deny the vastness that calls from within. I learned to honor my own pace, to celebrate each small unfolding of a feather, each tentative stretch of muscle, each moment of trust blossoming in the face of fear. And as I did, I felt my spirit expand, the boundaries of my self-made cage dissolving like mist in morning light. I began to see that the path of flight was not a solitary one, but one shared with the countless souls who, like me, had been born with wings yet hesitated to use them. In our shared struggles and triumphs, I found a sacred fellowship, a chorus of voices rising in song, voices that reminded me that I was never truly alone in my longing or my journey. There were days when the pull of fear was so strong that my wings felt heavy with doubt, weighed down by memories of failure and wounds still raw. On those days, would seek refuge in the quiet corners of my heart, places untouched by the noise of the world, where a small flame of hope still flickered. I would speak softly to that flame, reminding it that even the smallest light can pierce the darkest night, that vulnerability is the birthplace of courage, and that the very act of daring to spread one's wings is itself an act of profound bravery. And so, step by step, breath by breath, I continued to unfold, choosing each day to rise a little higher, to trust a little deeper, to love a little more fiercely. I embraced the truth that the soul's wings are always ready, if only we have the courage to let them spread, to catch the winds of possibility, and to soar beyond the narrow confines of fear into the boundless sky of being. This unfolding is the sacred dance of life, the eternal call to remember who we truly are beneath the dust and shadows, beings born to fly, to transcend, and to touch the infinite. There came a moment when the truth of flight unfolded before me, not as a distant dream or an ethereal ideal, but as a living, breathing reality pulsing within my very bones. Until then, I had carried in my heart a quiet restlessness, a yearning to rise beyond the bounds of flesh and circumstance, yet I clung tightly to the familiar shadows of fear and doubt. I feared the unknown currents of the wind, the fragile span of my own wings, and the vastness of the open sky. But on a day bathed in golden light, standing upon a gentle hill where the earth whispered its ancient secrets beneath my feet and the breeze caressed my face like a lover's touch, the veil was lifted. I saw, with a clarity that left my soul trembling, that to fly was not to flee from life's trials, but to embrace them, fully, deeply, without reserve. Flight, I realized, is not a mere physical ascent, but a sacred dance of courage and surrender, strength and vulnerability. To rise is to risk falling, to open oneself to the wild unpredictability of existence. The wings I was born with were not shields to protect me from pain or failure, but delicate instruments designed to carry me through the storms and sunlight alike. I had mistaken the shelter of earthbound crawling for safety, when in truth it was a cage of my own making. My fears, my self-imposed limitations, had woven walls that kept me from the boundless freedom I was meant to know. In that radiant moment, I understood that vulnerability is the very essence of flight. It is the willingness to expose one's heart, to spread the feathers wide and trust that the unseen currents will hold. The cosmos itself, with its vast expanse of stars that blaze with brilliant light born from darkness, teaches this sacred lesson. Even the stars must surrender to the night, travel through voids unknown before bursting into radiance. How then could I shrink from my own journey? How could I deny the wings that called me toward the infinite? This awakening stirred a profound compassion within me, not only for myself, but for all souls who walk the delicate line between fear and freedom. I saw that to fly is not to abandon others, but to rise alongside them, to become a beacon of hope and courage. Our wings are not meant to isolate, but to connect, weaving a tapestry of light that binds us in shared ascent. We lift one another, carried by the winds of love, empathy, and understanding. Flight becomes a collective dance of spirits, each movement resonating with the whole. Yet, I knew that such flight demands patience and grace. Wings are fragile and must be nurtured with kindness. Kindness toward ourselves when we falter, when the winds buffet us harshly, when doubt clouds our vision. The path is not a straight line, but a spiraling ascent, marked by moments of stillness and storms, of soaring and resting. Even the mightiest eagle folds its wings to rest before the next great rise. I learned to honor these pauses, to find strength in surrender and wisdom in waiting. In embracing this sacred rhythm, my spirit expanded beyond the narrow confines of fear and self-doubt. The boundaries that once hemmed me in dissolved like morning mist, revealing a vast sky within and without. I understood that life's fullness comes not from control or certainty, but from openness to the unknown. The call to fly is an invitation to step beyond the familiar, to trust in the mystery that cradles all things, and to dance with the ever-changing winds of existence. So now, when the choice arises, to crawl or to fly, I remember that I was born with wings, not to shrink into shadows, but to soar into light. I carry within me the sacred knowledge that every fall is but a step in the dance, every fear a shadow that reveals the contours of my courage. With each beat of my wings, I affirm my commitment to live fully, to love fiercely, and to embrace the boundless sky that awaits beyond hesitation. This is the song of my soul, the eternal melody that rises beyond words, echoing through the hearts of all who dare to unfold their wings and soar toward the infinite horizon of being. There was a time when I wandered through life weighed down by unseen chains, my wings folded tight against my back, hidden beneath the dust of doubt and fear. The world around me seemed a vast and bewildering place, full of shadows that whispered caution and voices that urged restraint. I told myself that crawling was safe, that to keep my feet close to the earth was to avoid the cruel winds of failure and the dizzying heights of disappointment. Yet deep inside, beneath the layers of hesitation, a restless yearning stirred, a gentle but persistent call from the soul reminding me that I was born not to crawl, but to fly. In the quiet moments when the world slipped away and only the beating of my heart remained, I felt this calling grow stronger. It was not a shout, but a whisper, a soft rustling like the wings of a bird stirring in the dawn. It spoke of freedom not as escape, but as embrace. To soar was not to flee the earth, but to meet it fully, to dance with the winds and the sunlight, to know both the vastness of the sky and the solidity of the ground. Flight was the soul's true nature, the gift given to each of us at birth, waiting only for the courage to unfurl and take wing. I remember the first time I dared to open my wings, trembling with uncertainty and wonder. The air was cool and fresh, the sky stretching endlessly above me, an invitation and a challenge. My wings felt fragile, their feathers soft and untested, yet as I lifted, even slightly, a surge of exhilaration coursed through me. The world seemed to shimmer with new light, colors deepened, sounds became clearer, and the breath of life filled me with a boundless joy. It was a moment of awakening, a revelation that the soul's flight is a journey of both discovery and transformation. But the path of flight is never without struggle. For every soaring moment, there are times when the winds howl fiercely, when doubt bites at the edges of courage, and when the weight of fear threatens to pull one back down. I learned that flying requires patience and compassion, toward oneself and toward the world. It is a dance of persistence and surrender, of strength and gentleness. Sometimes the wings must fold and rest, other times they must stretch wide and catch the strongest currents. There is wisdom in the pauses as well as in the flight itself. In embracing this rhythm, I found that the soul's wings are not only for personal ascent but for connection. To fly is to see beyond the narrow confines of self, to recognize the shared sky that holds all beings. The act of soaring becomes a call to lift others, to share the light that comes from rising above fear and limitation. Our wings, fragile as they may seem, carry the weight of collective hope and love. Each beat is a prayer for freedom, each glide a testament to the power of faith. I have come to know that life itself is the great school of flight, an endless sky where lessons come in forms of joy and sorrow, certainty and mystery, beginnings and endings. To be born with wings is to be invited into this sacred dance, to learn to trust the unseen currents, and to embrace the fullness of existence with open arms and open heart. Why choose to crawl, then, when the heavens beckon and the soul longs to soar? This is the question I carry with me always, a song and a challenge, a truth and a prayer. And so I rise, again and again, beneath the vast expanse of sky, letting my wings catch the wind, trusting the journey, and knowing that I was made for flight, born to transcend, to transform, and to touch the infinite. There was a profound turning point in my journey when I came to understand that flying was not simply about rising above the earth, but about surrendering to the fullness of life in all its complexity. Up until then, I had often seen flight as an escape, a way to flee from the pain, the confusion, the messiness of human existence. But that day, standing beneath the vast canopy of the heavens, I realized that true flight is a deep, intimate union with the world itself. It is to lie down, fully exposed and vulnerable, in the grass of life's unfolding, and to allow the soul to breathe freely without the need to constantly grasp, resist, or control. The soul's wings do not seek to detach us from the earth, but to root us more profoundly within it, so we may rise with grounded grace. I remember the sensation vividly, the softness of the grass beneath my back, the whisper of the breeze against my face, the gentle warmth of sunlight that seemed to seep into my bones and awaken something long dormant within. In that moment, the cacophony of the world, the endless striving, the restless yearning, the harsh judgments, fell away into silence. It was as if the world itself was too full, too rich, too profound to be spoken about. Words, so often my refuge and my prison, seemed suddenly inadequate, incapable of capturing the vastness of what lay within and around me. This silence was not emptiness, but fullness, a sacred space where the soul could rest, unburdened by the need to define, explain, or resist. As I lay there, I felt the boundaries between myself and the world dissolve. I was no longer a separate being struggling against the tides of existence, but a thread woven into the great tapestry of life. The grass beneath me was not merely earth, but a living, breathing connection to all that is, past, present, and future. I was cradled by the very fabric of creation, held tenderly by the embrace of a universe that asks nothing in return but our presence, our willingness to be. In that embrace, I found a profound peace, a peace that transcended understanding and opened a doorway to a deeper knowing. This experience taught me that the soul's journey is not a relentless pursuit of more, but a surrender to what already is. It is an invitation to lay down the burdens we carry, the masks we wear, and the illusions that keep us crawling through life when we were meant to fly. When the soul lies down in that grass, when it rests in the quiet fullness of being, the world becomes too abundant to grasp with words or fear. It overflows with a richness that fills every pore and every breath, leaving no room for judgment or resistance. In this sacred rest, I came to understand that flight and stillness are not opposites but partners. To soar is to know when to rise and when to lie down, to trust when to stretch one's wings and when to fold them close. The grass, soft and welcoming, became a symbol of this balance, a place where the soul can find nourishment and renewal, where it can surrender without losing its essence. It is in this delicate interplay between motion and rest, between yearning and acceptance, that true freedom is found. The lessons of that moment echoed through my days afterward, teaching me to see life as a series of breaths, some expansive and soaring, others quiet and grounding. I came to cherish the times of stillness as much as the times of flight, understanding that each had its sacred purpose. The world, in its infinite complexity, is too full to be contained by our desires or fears. It simply is, unfolding with a richness beyond comprehension. As I returned from that place of quiet surrender to the rhythms of daily life, I carried with me a new vision. I saw that to live fully is to be present in each moment, to embrace both the soaring heights and the gentle earth beneath. The soul's wings are always there, ready to lift us beyond fear and limitation, but they ask us also to come home, to lie down in the grass, to rest, to simply be. And in that being, the world is no longer something to be conquered or escaped, but a vast, overflowing gift too full to speak about, yet endlessly to be lived and loved. I began to notice this fullness in every encounter, in the laughter of children playing beneath the trees, in the tender touch of a loved one's hand, in the golden light of sunset melting into the horizon. Each moment, when truly received with an open heart, revealed the world's infinite abundance and mystery. I learned that when the soul lies down in that grass, it opens to the sacred flow of existence, where time slows and the boundaries between self and other dissolve into unity. This lesson, carried gently in my heart, became a source of solace and strength. Whenever I felt overwhelmed by life's trials or lost in the maze of my thoughts, I would remember the grass beneath me, the vast sky above, and the quiet fullness of that sacred silence. It was an ever-present reminder that I am part of something far greater than my fears and struggles, a universe too abundant to be contained by words, yet accessible through the simple act of being. This is the paradox and the gift of life, to know when to rise and when to rest, when to spread one's wings and when to lie down and surrender. The soul's flight is not a relentless push against the earth, but a rhythmic dance with it, a coming home to the vastness within and without. In this dance, I found the deepest freedom, the freedom to simply be, fully alive and wholly embraced by the overflowing world too full to talk about. At this profound juncture in my journey, I realized that the truth woven into the words, when the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about, was not merely a poetic image or an abstract teaching, but a living invitation to the very heart of existence. It called me to a sacred surrender, not to weakness or defeat, but to a fullness so vast and so rich that it transcends speech, thought, and even the deepest longing to understand. This fullness is an overflowing wellspring of life itself, where all contradictions meet and dissolve, the joy and sorrow, the light and shadow, the soaring and the resting. Throughout my days, I had chased after flight, yearning to lift myself beyond the mundane and the painful, believing that rising meant escape. Yet as I learned to lie down, in humility, in stillness, in radical openness, I discovered that the soul's wings do not reject the earth beneath but embrace it. The grass is not simply ground, it is a living, breathing presence, a sanctuary where the soul can release its burdens and remember its true nature. To lie down in this grass is to yield to life in its entirety, to rest in the present moment without striving or resistance, to be fully seen and held by the mystery that enfolds all things. In that sacred surrender, the world reveals itself as too full, too abundant for words to contain. Language, with all its beauty and power, can only gesture toward this fullness but never grasp it completely. The silence that arises in such moments is not emptiness but a profound presence, a sacred space where the soul drinks deeply from the well of being, where the boundaries between self and other soften and the illusion of separation fades away. It is here that I felt the pulse of life itself, the heartbeat of the cosmos echoing within my own chest, reminding me that I am both utterly unique and inseparably connected to all that is. This realization reshaped my understanding of freedom and flight. True freedom is not a frantic escape from life's challenges, but a deep acceptance of life's totality, the grief and the ecstasy, the chaos and the calm. It is a freedom born from surrender, from lying down in that grass with an open heart and trusting that the soul's wings are not diminished but nourished by such rest. The dance of flight is incomplete without this grounding, without the willingness to descend, to be vulnerable, to embrace stillness as a form of power. As I continued this path, I found that the interplay between soaring and resting became the rhythm of my being. The wings that carried me to great heights also needed the softness of the earth to unfold fully. The breath that lifted me into the sky also drew strength from the grounding air beneath. I came to honor the sacred balance between action and surrender, between striving and receiving, between the reach of the spirit and the embrace of the present moment. In the quiet moments of lying down, I sensed the presence of countless others, souls also seeking this fullness, this balance, this sacred rest. We are not solitary travelers, but companions on a shared pilgrimage, each called to find our own way between the sky and the soil, between flight and stillness. The grass beneath us is the common ground, a place of refuge and renewal where we can lay down our burdens and awaken to the vast mystery that connects us all. And so, this teaching became a living prayer within me, that I might learn to lie down as well as to soar, to rest as fully as I rise, to speak in silence and listen with my whole being. It is a call to embrace the world not only in moments of triumph, but in moments of surrender, to find grace in both the winds that lift me and the earth that holds me. The soul's journey is not a linear ascent, but a sacred dance, a weaving together of light and shadow, movement and stillness, longing and fulfillment. In this dance, I discovered the deepest truth of all, that we were born with wings not merely to escape but to embrace, not simply to fly but also to rest, to lie down in that sacred grass where the world is too full to talk about, yet endlessly rich to be lived, to loved, and to become. And in this knowing, I found a peace beyond all understanding, a peace that carries me forward and holds me close, a peace that is itself the gentle flight of the soul home.